The bull cried beside an empty well for days, until the farmer's son finally looked inside. What happens next will leave you speechless. The bull's cry cut through the stillness of the afternoon like a blade. It was not the usual grunt or low rumble of a beast unsettled. It was raw, stretched, and sorrowful, the kind of sound that made the skin prickle and the heart beat faster. Emiliano, who had been stacking dried hay against the wooden shed, froze mid-motion. The pitch of Tarano's voice carried across the fields, bouncing off the low hills that surrounded San Esteban. He dropped the bundle of hay, dust scattering at his feet, and turned toward the far edge of the pasture where the sound came from. Tarano stood by the old stone well, his massive body rigid, head tilted slightly down as if he were staring into it. His black coat gleamed under the unforgiving sun, muscles shifting as he pawed the earth with one heavy hoof. The animal bellowed again, the sound so drawn out it seemed to come from a place of grief. Emiliano's first thought was that something had startled him, perhaps a snake, perhaps a fox. But this was different. The bull wasn't agitated. He was mourning. Emiliano's throat tightened as he began to walk toward him, each step hesitant. The dry grass crunched under his sandals, and with every pace forward the boy's unease grew. His hands clenched at his sides. Tarano was the fiercest animal in their herd, yet Emiliano had never seen him like this. The boy swallowed, whispering under his breath, "What's wrong, Tarano?" His voice trembled in the wind, but the bull didn't look at him. He kept his head low, eyes fixed on the shadowy mouth of the well. The structure was old, its stones cracked and covered in moss. Weeds had grown wild around it, some curling up its sides as if trying to hide it from view. Emiliano's father had told him long ago that the well had dried before his birth, its water gone, leaving only an empty shaft. Still, there it stood, a silent relic that no one used and few even approached. Now, standing so close, Emiliano felt a chill slide down his back. He leaned over the edge, placing his palms against the rough stones. A heavy, cool draft rose from the darkness, carrying with it the scent of damp earth. His heart beat louder in his ears as he squinted into the void. Nothing, no movement, no glimmer of light, just an abyss swallowing everything. He let out a shaky breath, half relieved and half disappointed that there was nothing unusual. Then came the sound, a faint scrape. It was so soft he almost convinced himself it was a trick of his imagination. He pulled back quickly, eyes wide, breath catching in his throat. The sound had been too real, like nails dragging against stone, distant but distinct. Emiliano stumbled back a step, dust swirling around his feet. "No," he muttered to himself. "It's just the wind." Yet his body told him otherwise. He glanced at Tarano, who snorted and shifted closer to the well, lowering his head as if pointing toward it. The boy wiped his sweaty palms against his shirt. "It's empty," he whispered, almost as though trying to convince himself. But why, then, did it feel alive? Why did it feel like something, or someone, was down there? He crouched near the rim again, straining his ears. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, so faint it could have been mistaken for imagination, he heard it again, the soft, desperate scratching. His chest tightened. The sound did not belong in a place declared abandoned for decades. "Emiliano!" The sharp voice of his father made him jolt. Rodrigo was crossing the field, his weathered face frowning under the brim of his straw hat. He carried a hoe slung over his shoulder, dust clinging to his clothes. "What are you doing near that cursed hole?" Emiliano stood quickly, brushing dirt off his knees. "Father, Tarano's been crying here. He won't leave the well. And I think—" His words stumbled as he tried to explain the sound he had heard, the weight of his fear pressing against his chest. "I think there's something inside." I heard scratching. Rodrigo stopped a few paces away, eyes narrowing at the boy. For a moment, his sternness softened, replaced by concern. But then he shook his head firmly, waving a hand dismissively. "You've let your imagination run wild. Bulls cry out sometimes. The heat, the flies, their own restlessness. Nothing more. But father—" "No," Rodrigo said sharply, his voice echoing with finality. He pointed the hoe toward the farmhouse. "Get away from there. That well has been dry since my father's time. It's nothing but stone and dirt now." Emiliano opened his mouth to argue but saw the steel in his father's eyes. He lowered his gaze, his chest burning with frustration. "Yes, father." Rodrigo grunted, satisfied, though he cast one last wary glance at Tarano before turning back toward the fields. The bull still hadn't moved, still stood beside the well like a sentinel guarding a grave. Emiliano's jaw clenched. He knew what he'd heard. He knew what he'd seen. That evening, the farmhouse groaned under the touch of the wind. Emiliano lay on his straw bed, staring at the wooden beams above him. Every creak sounded sharper, every shadow heavier. He turned from side to side, restless. His father's words replayed in his head, clashing against his own memory of the faint scratching. Then, unbidden, the bull's cries returned to him. Not in the distance now, but loud and clear in his mind. That sound of grief, of pleading, echoing from a beast that should not have been capable of such sorrow. Emiliano pressed a pillow against his ears, but it did nothing. He could not shut it out. The night grew darker, the walls colder, and the boy realized he would find no sleep. His mind churned with possibilities, with fear and curiosity bound together. What lay in that well? What could make Tarano mourn like that? And why had his father been so quick to silence him? He turned toward the small window where the moonlight spilled across the floor, his fists clenched in the sheets. He couldn't ignore it, not anymore. If his father would not listen, then he would discover the truth himself. By the time the roosters crowed at dawn, Emiliano had made his decision. He rose quietly, careful not to wake his father, and slipped out of the farmhouse. The morning air was sharp and cool, carrying the scent of soil and dew. His footsteps were steady, though his heart raced. The field stretched endlessly before him, but his eyes were fixed only on one thing, the old stone well at the edge of the land. And beside it, as if he had never left, stood Tarano, his massive head bent low, waiting. Emiliano tightened his jaw, the weight of his choice pressing down on him. He walked faster, each step bringing him closer to whatever truth the shadows below were hiding. Foreshadowing the danger ahead, Emiliano didn't know that once he looked again, his life would change forever, and the village of San Esteban would never be the same. The morning was pale and quiet when Emiliano slipped out of the farmhouse. His bare feet pressed into the damp soil, leaving faint impressions that would vanish once the sun rose higher. He clutched a lantern in one hand, the other holding a length of rope he had taken from the shed. His breaths were shallow, quick, as if afraid even the air might betray his intent. Tarano was already there. The bull's massive form stood rigid beside the well, steam rising faintly from his nostrils in the cool dawn. He pawed the ground with heavy hooves, sending dust into the air, his tail flicking in agitation. Emiliano slowed as he approached, his pulse hammering louder with each step. The animal's eyes glistened strangely in the half-light, as though urging him closer. "All right," Emiliano whispered, lowering his lantern to the ground. "I'll look again." He leaned over the rim, bracing his hands against the cracked stones. The well yawned beneath him, dark and endless. At first, there was only blackness, but then something caught the faint light, a glint far below, like a shard of metal or glass. Emiliano narrowed his eyes, straining against the shadows. He couldn't be certain, but whatever it was, it didn't belong in an abandoned well. His chest tightened with curiosity and dread. Slowly he tied the lantern's handle to the end of the rope, testing the knot twice before lowering it into the void. The rope scraped against stone as the lantern descended, the flame swaying with each movement. Emiliano gripped the rope tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the deepening glow. The lantern reached the bottom, its light spreading across the ground like liquid fire. And then Emiliano saw them. Bones. White, scattered, unmistakable bones. His stomach clenched. These were not the remains of an animal. The shape was too human, the curve of a rib, the hollow of a skull, the angle of a femur. He gasped sharply, the sound breaking against the silent fields. His grip faltered, and he stumbled back, almost tripping over the dirt. His breath came fast, shallow, his heart pounding so violently it hurt. His eyes darted toward Tarano, who had lowered his massive head and was stamping the earth with renewed urgency. The bull snorted, loud and forceful, as though demanding Emiliano understand. "No," Emiliano muttered, shaking his head, his voice trembling. This can't be real." Yet he knew what he had seen. No trick of the light could arrange bones like that. He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to steady himself. His first thought was of his father. He should run back, tell Rodrigo what he had found. But then, memory struck like a whip. Rodrigo's stern dismissal the night before, his refusal to even consider the possibility that the well was anything more than empty stone. If Emiliano returned now, would he believe him? Or would he accuse him of imagining things again? The boy's hands tightened into fists. No, if the truth was to be revealed, he had to uncover it himself. The day stretched slow and heavy after that. Emiliano moved through his chores with little focus, his mind consumed by the image of those bones at the bottom of the well. The clinking of buckets, the rustling of animals, even his father's voice all blurred into the background. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the lantern's flickering glow touching pale remains that should never have been there. When Rodrigo left to tend a distant field, Emiliano returned to the shed, pulling down another coil of rope. He tested its strength, knotting it around a heavy stone to ensure it would hold his weight. His palms were sweaty, his stomach tight, but determination burned in his chest. He would go down into the well. He had to. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, Emiliano returned to the site. Turano was still there, pacing slowly, his massive body blocking the light. Emiliano set the rope by the rim, tying it firmly around a sturdy tree root that jutted from the ground. He tested the knot, tugging hard until the root itself shuddered but did not break. He wiped his brow and took a deep breath. His legs trembled slightly, but he forced them still. He leaned forward, preparing to descend. Then came the sound of voices. Emiliano froze, his heart skipping. He quickly ducked behind a nearby tree, pressing his back against the rough bark. He held his breath, peering around the trunk. 2 men walked toward the well from the direction of the village, their figures tall and familiar. Matteo and Isandro. The sight of them made Emiliano's stomach twist. They were older men, broad-shouldered and heavy with the confidence of those who often got what they wanted. Known for their greed, they had long carried reputations of taking more than they deserved, whether in trade, harvest, or power. They carried themselves with the arrogance of men who feared little. Emiliano shrank deeper into the shadows, careful to stay hidden. The men stopped by the well, their voices low but clear enough in the still air. "The boy's been sniffing too close," Matteo muttered, glancing around. His lips curled in irritation. "I saw him wandering here yesterday. He's curious. Too curious," Isandro spat onto the ground, folding his arms. "Then we need to make sure he doesn't dig deeper." That well should have stayed sealed. Emiliano's breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened as a shiver raced down his spine. They knew. They knew about the bones. Matteo gave a humorless chuckle, though his eyes darted nervously into the shadows of the well. "It's been years. Who would believe him? He's just a boy." Isandro's voice lowered, heavy with something darker. "The same thing people said about Rodrigo's brother. Remember? One night he was here, the next, gone." Emiliano's heart lurched violently. He pressed a hand to his mouth to keep from making a sound. Rodrigo's brother, his uncle. A man Emiliano had only heard about in fragments, hushed mentions of his sudden disappearance long before the boy's birth. His father had never spoken of him directly. Could those bones at the bottom of the well belong to him? The thought hit him like a thunderclap. His knees weakened, and he pressed harder against the tree to keep from falling. Matteo and Isandro spoke on, their laughter low and uneasy, as if they tried to cover their fear with bravado. But to Emiliano, each word was a dagger, carving deeper into a truth he was not supposed to know. Turano snorted suddenly, pawing the earth so forcefully it echoed like a warning drum. The men stiffened, turning toward him. "Damn beast," Matteo muttered, tossing a stone at the bull. It bounced harmlessly off the dirt near his hooves, but Turano lowered his head, muscles rippling, eyes burning. "Let's go," Isandro said quickly, tugging his companion's arm. "No need to linger." We said what we needed. The 2 men walked off, their shadows stretching long behind them as they vanished into the distance. Only when they were gone did Emiliano release the breath he had been holding. He leaned back against the tree, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his face pale. His hands shook uncontrollably. So it was true. The bones were not just a nameless secret. They belonged to someone, his father's brother, his own blood, and Matteo and Isandro knew. He turned his gaze toward Turano, who stood tall and unwavering, eyes fixed on him as if demanding he act. The bull gave a low, rumbling growl, his breath fogging in the cooling air. Emiliano's fear clashed with something stronger now, determination. If he stepped forward, he risked danger greater than he had ever known. But if he stepped back, the truth would remain buried, the cries of the past ignored. His hands clenched into fists. He knew, in that moment, what path lay ahead. Turano growled again, the sound echoing like an oath sworn in the fading light. Emiliano realized he wasn't only uncovering secrets, he was walking into a trap that the whole village may have conspired to keep hidden. The cries of the bull now felt less like warning and more like an oath. Something buried in the past was demanding to be brought to light. That night, Emiliano stood before his father, his body trembling, his lips dry as he forced the words out. The dim glow of the fire in their hearth threw shadows across Rodrigo's face, turning his features into a mask of stone. Emiliano's voice cracked as he spoke, describing the bones at the bottom of the well and the whispers of Matteo and Isandro. He expected anger, perhaps even laughter at his foolishness. But what came instead unsettled him more deeply than any denial. Rodrigo's face drained of color, his weathered skin paling until it looked ashen in the flickering light. His strong hands, hands that had wrestled with plows and stone for decades, shook as he pressed them against the table. Emiliano's heart skipped. He had never seen his father falter. "Lucero," Rodrigo whispered hoarsely, his eyes distant, as if staring into another time. Emiliano stepped forward. Your brother? Rodrigo lifted his gaze, and for a moment the boy saw a storm behind his father's eyes. Grief, anger, and fear all colliding. The well, Rodrigo said slowly, was not always empty. It once gave water to this land, but that changed the night my brother vanished. Emiliano's throat tightened. He knew fragments of this story, hints told in passing, but never in such raw detail. Rodrigo's voice broke as he continued. They said he fell in. They said he was drunk and quarreled with the men of the village. But I knew my brother. He drank, yes, but he was no fool. I always suspected more. A hand pushed him. A blade struck him. Murder, not accident. But I was young then, weaker, and they... Rodrigo's words stopped, his jaw clenched tight. They? Emiliano pressed, his voice sharp with urgency. Rodrigo's fists tightened, knuckles white. Men like Mateo, men like Isandro, and others who wished Lucero silenced. I could never prove it. The village sealed the well, and with it the truth. For years the land has been avoided, cursed, they said. But now... He looked at Emiliano with eyes heavy as stone. Now you've found the bones. That curse is nothing but guilt. Buried deep, Emiliano's chest rose and fell quickly. His voice trembled. We can take this to the authorities, to San Esteban. They'll listen if we bring proof. Rodrigo let out a bitter laugh, hollow and sharp. The men you speak of have ties there. Power bends to them. You think the truth has not tried to surface before? It has, and every time it was drowned. His voice softened, almost a plea. Emiliano, listen to me. These men will not allow the past to rise again. They would rather kill than see it uncovered. The boy shook his head, eyes burning with stubborn fire. So we stay silent? Let Lucero rot beneath the soil while murderers walk free? Rodrigo slammed his hand on the table, the sound cracking like a whip. I lost my brother once. I will not lose my son to the same darkness. His voice shook, the strength of his anger broken by the weight of his fear. The room felt too small, the air heavy with unspoken truths. Emiliano's chest ached with the war between his father's warnings and his own resolve. They might have argued until dawn if not for the sudden, bone-deep cry that shattered the silence. Tirano. The bull's voice echoed through the night, deep and mournful, cutting through their quarrel like a blade. Rodrigo's head snapped toward the door, his face tight with dread. Emiliano was already moving, his feet pounding against the floorboards as he rushed outside. The moon hung high, spilling silver across the land. Tirano stood near the well, his massive body illuminated, his horns lowered as he tore at the ground. Dirt flew into the air with every strike. Emiliano's eyes widened as the bull's horns clanged against something buried beneath the soil. A sharp metallic sound rang out, unnatural against the earth. Heart racing, Emiliano darted forward. He dropped to his knees, his hands clawing at the ground where Tirano had struck. His fingers scraped against cold iron. He dug faster, the dirt crumbling beneath his nails, until at last he pulled free a rusted dagger. Its surface was mottled with age, yet the blade carried dark stains that time had not erased. Rodrigo's breath caught as he approached, his face stricken with recognition. Emiliano's own pulse thundered as realization struck. This was no ordinary blade. This was the weapon that had ended Lucero's life. Before either could speak, voices pierced the night. "Drop it!" Emiliano turned sharply, the dagger still clutched in his trembling hand. Mateo and Isandro emerged from the shadows, torches blazing in one hand, blades glinting in the other. The firelight painted their faces in cruel shades, their eyes hard and merciless. "You should not have come here," Mateo said, his voice low and venomous. Rodrigo stepped in front of Emiliano, his broad frame shielding the boy. His hands were empty, but his stance carried defiance. "Stay back," he growled, his voice firm despite the tremor beneath. Isandro sneered, lifting his torch higher so the flame threw long, twisting shadows. "You found what was meant to stay hidden. Forget it, Rodrigo. Forget it, boy. Or the earth will claim you both, like it claimed Lucero." Emiliano's heart pounded so hard it hurt. He clutched the dagger tighter, feeling its weight anchor him to the moment. He saw it now, the fear in their eyes, carefully masked beneath threats. They did not only want silence. They dreaded exposure more than violence. He whispered, his voice urgent, barely audible. "Father." "They're afraid." Rodrigo glanced back, his expression torn between confusion and resolve. Emiliano's mind raced. He looked toward Tirano, the bull standing just behind them, his chest heaving, his breath loud in the night. The animal's eyes burned with fury, his muscles coiled with restless power. Emiliano's thoughts sharpened into a single desperate plan. "Tirano," he whispered, raising his hand in a subtle gesture, his movements slow, careful not to alert the men. The bull snorted, lowering his massive head, his hooves scraping the soil like thunder rolling in the distance. Matteo's torch wavered as he caught sight of the beast. "What are you doing?" Isandro barked, stepping forward, his blade raised. Emiliano's breath caught, but he did not falter. He lifted his hand higher, his eyes locked with Tyranno's. It was not command, but trust. With a roar of earth and muscle, Tyranno charged. The ground shook beneath his weight, dust rising in violent clouds. Matteo shouted, stumbling backward as the bull's horns sliced the air. Isandro dropped his torch, the fire scattering in sparks across the soil, his eyes wide with sudden terror. The two men scattered, their blades flashing before vanishing into chaos. "Now!" Emiliano cried, seizing his father's arm. Together they grabbed the dagger, clutching it as proof, their only weapon against the lies of years. But in the frenzy, fate turned its hand. Isandro stumbled, his foot slipping on the uneven ground. His cry pierced the night as his body pitched forward. Emiliano's eyes widened in horror as Isandro fell toward the very pit he had sworn to guard. His hands clawed the air, but there was nothing to grasp. The scream echoed, long and shrill, until it was swallowed whole by the darkness of the well. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Only the sound of Tyranno's breath, loud and ragged, remained. Emiliano stood frozen, the dagger clutched tight in his fist, the truth burning bright in his mind. For the first time he understood why the bull had cried. The well was not just empty, it was a grave demanding justice. The following morning, San Esteban awoke to a scream. A farmer had gone to draw water from the old well and instead found what no man wished to see. The sound of his horror carried across the quiet streets, pulling men from their homes. Soon, a crowd gathered at the stone mouth of the well, their faces pale as they looked down into its shadowy depths. At the bottom lay the broken body of Isandro, twisted unnaturally, his limbs bent where bones had shattered. His eyes, half open, stared blankly at the sky above, though they would never see the light again. The whispers rose immediately, fierce and fast. He fell. No, he was thrown. Why would Isandro be at the well? The air itself seemed to tremble with suspicion. Some crossed themselves, others spat on the ground, muttering that his end was punishment for sins too long hidden. Emiliano stood in the crowd, his fists clenched so tight his nails cut into his skin. Rodrigo stood close by, tense and watchful, as the murmurs thickened like smoke. The people of San Esteban had carried the weight of secrets for years, and now the well had given back more than a body. It had given back fear. Before the sun reached its peak, the sheriff arrived. He was a broad man with a lined face and eyes sharp as a hawk's. With ropes and hooks, the men of the village pulled Isandro's body from the depths. As they laid him on the earth, something fell from his clothing. A rusted dagger, its blade stained dark though dulled with age. The sheriff bent down, lifting it carefully, and the murmurs broke into shouts. "That's Lucero's!" someone cried. "I remember!" He carried it always. Emiliano's heart lurched. The sight of that dagger confirmed what he and his father already knew, but it also carried danger. Truth had a way of cutting, and sometimes it cut those who tried to reveal it. The sheriff turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This dagger belonged to Lucero," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "And now it's found with Isandro. Tell me, who else was there the night Lucero vanished?" The question fell like a stone into the silence. For a long moment, no one dared to speak. Then Matteo stepped forward, his face drawn but his eyes burning with anger. "It was them," he said, pointing toward Emiliano and Rodrigo. His voice shook, but his tone was sharp, desperate. "I saw them near the well. They were fighting with Lucero. Isandro tried to stop them. They killed him, and now they've killed Isandro too." The words struck like thunder. Emiliano felt the world tilt. Rodrigo stiffened beside him, his jaw set. "That's a lie," Rodrigo growled, his voice low, but the crowd stirred uneasily. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "Do you have proof, Matteo?" the sheriff asked, his tone firm. Matteo hesitated, but then his voice rose, trembling yet defiant. "Others saw it too. They were afraid to speak before, but they know. Ask them." The people shifted, avoiding each other's eyes. Slowly, haltingly, a few men nodded. Their voices cracked as they admitted that they had seen Matteo, Isandro, and Lucero together on that dark night. Their silence had been their shield, but now, with the body and the dagger before them, the shield shattered. Emiliano's chest burned. He wanted to shout, to cry out the truth, but his throat locked. He looked at Tyranno, the bull standing beyond the crowd, its dark eyes fixed on the scene. The animal's stillness seemed almost human, as though it watched with the weight of memory. Rodrigo placed a hand on Emiliano's shoulder, steadying him. "Do not fear," he whispered. His voice carried pain, but also pride. The truth may bleed us, but it will not vanish. The sheriff raised his hand for silence. Mateo, you accuse these men, but it is your word against theirs, unless more speak. And they did. Men who had been boys then, their voices quaking with guilt, confessed they had seen Mateo and Isandro dragging Lucero toward the well. They had heard Lucero's cries, seen his struggle, and then turned away, too frightened of Mateo's wrath. Now, with the dagger gleaming in the sun and Isandro's lifeless body sprawled on the ground, their silence broke. The sheriff's eyes turned hard. He looked at Mateo, whose face had gone pale, sweat beading at his temple. Mateo tried to protest, his voice rising in frantic denial. They lie! They all lie! It was them, not me! His eyes darted wildly, landing on Emiliano. He wants to make me the villain because his father— Enough! The sheriff's voice cut through the noise like steel. Mateo, you are under arrest for the death of Lucero. Gasps tore through the crowd. Two men stepped forward, seizing Mateo by the arms as he thrashed. No! You fools, you don't understand! His voice cracked, half a scream, half a plea, but no one moved to defend him. The weight of years had collapsed upon him, and the village would not carry his shadow any longer. Emiliano stood frozen, his heart pounding. Relief battled with sorrow. He had dreamed of justice, but standing in its light was heavier than he imagined. Mateo's downfall did not bring joy. It brought a hollow ache, the echo of what had been lost. Rodrigo turned to his son, his weathered face softening. He drew Emiliano into his arms, holding him tightly. You did what I could not, he said, his voice breaking. You stood against the dark. I am proud of you, my son. Tirano stood near the edge, silent, his great head lowered as if in solemn witness. Emiliano watched the bull, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw understanding in its dark gaze. It was as if the creature knew that the cries it once gave had not been in vain. In the days that followed, life in San Esteban began to move again. Men returned to their fields, boys to their games, but a quiet hung over the village, a quiet heavy with memory. Emiliano walked often to the sealed well. He would stand there listening, though Tirano no longer cried. Still, sometimes, in the fading light of dusk, he thought he saw the bull standing guard, its presence steady, almost protective. The village spoke less of Lucero and Isandro, but the silence carried weight. It was no longer the silence of denial, but of remembrance. Emiliano carried the lesson deep within him that silence in the face of injustice allows shadows to grow, and that even the cries of a bull could carry the voice of the past. The land was quieter now, yet behind its silence lay a story that would never be forgotten. The bull no longer cried, but the village would always remember the night the well gave back its secret. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores powerful themes of empathy, loss, and the profound unspoken connections between humans and animals. This narrative aims to highlight the extraordinary emotional bonds that exist, inspiring compassion and a deeper appreciation for the silent struggles that connect us all.